Good morning again. We're going to reorient just a couple of things, including coffee. I know Unitarian Universalists have a deep appreciation for how important my coffee is. This is a moment in our service where anyone of any age could choose to come and join me up front. I love this story so much that I'm going to share with you today. But you know what else is really beautiful this morning? This is the week of the Liberal Religious Educators Fall Conference. I attended virtually this year, but it's set in Canada. So I got to hear Spirit of Life sung in French this weekend too, because many people in Canada speak French. So that was quite lovely. We sang it a number of times, and it filled my soul. So one of the things we're talking about in worship today is the welcome table. And the welcome table is an imaginary table around which there is a seat for all of us. But sometimes we forget that it's an imaginary table. And JetPig feels this keenly because, after all, JetPig can sit around the welcome table, right? But sometimes people will stop and think to themselves, wait, pigs don't sit at tables, and it's an imaginary table, guys. And we also sometimes forget, and could someone tend JetPig for me while I tell the rest of this story? Sometimes people also forget that because it is an imaginary table, its limits are not finite. It can grow. And sometimes that can look like scolding children who reach out for food before coffee hour and saying, but there might not be enough for everyone. And sometimes the kid is thinking, I thought I was everyone. So the story I want to share with you today is called The Doorbell Rang by Pat Hutchins. And this has been one of my faves for a long time. I will leave my remote control on. Oh. See what happens when I attend an event virtually? I have trouble coming back to reality. I've made some cookies for tea, said Ma. Good, said Victoria and Sam. We're starving. Share them between yourselves, said Ma. I made plenty. Well, that's 6 each, said Sam and Victoria. They look as good as Grandma's, said Victoria. They smell as good as Grandma's, said Sam. No one makes cookies like Grandma, said Ma, as the doorbell rang. It was Tom and Hannah from next door. Come in, said Ma. You can share the cookies. That's 3 each, said Sam and Victoria. They smell as good as your Grandma's, said Tom. And look as good, said Hannah. No one makes cookies like Grandma, said Ma, as the doorbell rang. It was Peter and his little brother. Come in, said Ma. You can share the cookies. Are we detecting a trend here, folks? That's 2 each, said Victoria and Sam. They look as good as your Grandma's, said Peter, and smell as good. Nobody makes cookies like Grandma, said Ma, as the doorbell rang. Ask not for whom the doorbell tolls. It tolls for thee. It was Joy and Simon with their 4 cousins. Come in, said Ma. You can share the cookies. Oh, dear. That's 1 each, said Sam and Victoria. They smell as good as your Grandma's, said Joy. And look as good, said Simon. No one makes cookies like Grandma, said Ma, as the doorbell rang. And rang? Oh dear, said Ma, as the children stared at the cookies on their plates. Perhaps you'd better eat them before we open the door. We'll wait, said Sam. Poor Sam. It was Grandma with an enormous tray of cookies. How nice to have so many friends to share them with, said Grandma. It's a good thing I made a lot. And no one makes cookies like Grandma, said Ma, as the doorbell rang. So this is kind of an interesting story because how many people here have had that feeling of, oh dear, the doorbell rang? I've had it, for sure. And you know what? I want to point something else out to you, and I don't know if you can see this or not. But did you notice what was happening to the floor as more and more and more people came in? Yeah, Lily, you saw it? It got dirty. There were a lot of muddy footprints. And who's cleaning them up? Ma. And that to me keenly applies to church life, because if you look around, you'll notice that sometimes it's the same people. And again, it's a metaphor, guys. Sometimes they're rewiring the building. Sometimes they're drywalling the basement. Sometimes they're the ones that are cleaning the kitchen up after coffee hour, even though they weren't signed up for coffee hour. But we always got to watch in our church spaces and remember that some people have to mop the floor before they even get to think about whether they get to sit down at the welcome table and eat the cookies. So keep an eye out for where you can extend that welcome table by helping too. And you will also find in your mailboxes today some Swedish fish and a story from one of the sacred scriptures that is among our UU inspirations, which is the Christian Bible, about the loaves and the fishes, which is another story about the welcome table being big enough. So enjoy your personal fishes. And now let us sing our way out to our religious exploration programs today.
Can you imagine being one of those kids, those first two kids with the original batch of cookies, watching as friend after friend shows up at the door? It's exciting to see your friends, and the cookies keep getting divided again and again. And maybe you start thinking, am I gonna get any cookies? I mean, it's nice to see friends and all, but man, I just want a cookie. But then just at that point where it seems like the cookies are gonna run out completely, the doorbell rings again and Grandma shows up with a whole new batch, because grandmas know things, don't they? Grandmas are kind of magic. Except it's not that the cookies appeared out of thin air, it's that somebody showed up and shared what she had. It's the same thing as Sarah just mentioned with the loaves and fishes story in the Bible, when there were a whole bunch of people gathered to listen to Jesus, but not enough food, and the day kept stretching on. It isn't that Jesus magically multiplied the fish and bread as it made it appear out of nowhere, so much as everybody who had food for themselves brought it out, and everybody started sharing what they had. And suddenly there was enough. They didn't share because they were sure more was on the way or that Jesus could magically manifest food for everyone. They shared because they were glad to be together, because they were generous, because they felt connected. And the people trusted that if I give, I won't end up empty. That's how miracles happen, not magic, just people showing up and being generous with what they have. But here's what I want you to notice. Nobody ended up with 6 cookies. The 2 kids who started with a dozen between them, it didn't stay that way. As more people arrived, they had to shift. The number of cookies everyone was going to get changed. The number of kids around the table changed. The whole experience changed. Because when the number of people changes, the way we do things has to change too. Function follows form. It's the opposite of the way you might have heard it before. Function follows form. The shape of a community, the form, how many people we have, how we're organized, determines how we work together, how we function. This isn't a moral issue or a crisis. It's not even really a problem. This is just what happens when things grow. Whether it's the number of people around a table, the number of people listening to a Sermon on the Mount, or the number of people in a congregation. A congregation kind of like UUI. This congregation is growing. More people are showing up, and that is extraordinary. Like, that is mind-blowing, because most churches right now are shrinking or even closing their doors. UUI is growing in participation, and so the way that we function together needs to evolve to match that reality. But before we talk about how that works, let's take a moment to remember where UUI came from, because this isn't the first time that this congregation has had to figure out how to make space for more. The Unitarian Universalist Church of Indianapolis officially began in 1979. Very good. That's the only quiz, I promise. When 93 adults and about 90 children between them signed a charter and said, we want a different kind of spiritual home, a warmer one, a family-centered one, a place where children aren't shushed out of the room but welcomed as full participants, and a place where power isn't concentrated in the hands of a few people who have the minister's ear. And so a founding group left All Souls over 45 years ago. You met in borrowed spaces for a while, and after you bought this property, you scrubbed and sanded and repaired. You built this place, not just financially, but literally with your blood and your sweat and your tears. And I'm sure that all of that was included. It took real courage to walk away from something familiar and build something new from scratch. But the heart of UUI, I think, has always been the same. You wanted and you built a community where no one gets shut out of the circle, where the welcome table grows. No one gets shut out because of age, because of power, not because of personality or status. This DNA, this particular flavor of we do this together is still here. It's in the way that you greet visitors and in the art on the walls. It's in the RE program and the community partnerships and in the way that you show up for each other when life gets hard. This isn't nostalgia. It's a part of the core code that makes UUI, UUI. It's part of how you see yourself, your identity. And if you're new here, or if you've been coming for a year or a month or even just a few weeks, maybe even if this is your first time, maybe you've already felt it. That welcoming, that sense of shared purpose. That's not an accident. That's the DNA that I'm talking about. And now you're all a part of carrying it forward. So when I say UUI is growing, I don't mean you are growing and becoming something else. I mean you are becoming more fully yourself. You are upscaling the very things this congregation was founded to be, a church with shared leadership where kids and families are welcomed with joy, a circle that keeps widening on purpose. Today, you are no longer 93 members. You are a congregation with nearly 300 members and friends. 10 years ago, your membership was half of what it is today. And different sizes of churches function differently. As a church grows or shrinks, the way leadership works changes, communication changes, the way decisions get made changes, even the way people feel connected to each other changes. There's something called a pastoral-sized church In a pastoral-sized church, which UUI has been for most of its identity, it's usually up to about 200-ish or so members, is like one big kitchen table. Everyone knows everyone. The minister is woven into almost every relationship. Decisions can be informal because everyone more or less knows everything that's going on. And then there's a program-sized church, which is usually from about it's iffy. You're in the middle of that. A program-sized church, which you're growing towards, is still warm and connected, but the structure is different. Communication happens through systems. The minister coaches leaders instead of being the hub of every relationship. And decisions happen through trusted boards and committees. The congregation shares leadership by trusting the leaders that they have empowered. Neither size, pastoral or program, is better. Neither is more spiritual. Neither is more friendly or more loving. Neither is more Unitarian Universalist. And they're not the same. They don't function the same. So when a congregation grows, when the form changes, how it functions generally needs to change too. If we try to do program-sized church life with pastoral-sized church systems and structure, the seams start to strain. Not because anyone is doing anything wrong, just because the shape has changed. It doesn't contain it as well anymore. Now, this isn't the first time that UUI has kind of felt the seams pulling like this. There was a period about 15 years ago when the sanctuary was full. You dabbled with going to 2 services on Sunday morning. There was a lot of energy and a lot of new faces, and you started having some of these same conversations. And we need to talk gently about this just for a minute, because that history lives on in the room, whether we name it or not. The growth that happened back then wasn't just coming from the core of who UUI is. It wasn't just coming from that founding identity of shared leadership, many voices, and children right in the center of things. Instead, it was growth driven by a lot of charisma, one person's energy and personality, and a theological emphasis that was not aligned with UUI's founding identity. And during that time, some of the very people who made this church, who painted walls and hung chairs and dug garden beds and kept the doors open, some of those folks started to feel pushed out, unwelcome, dismissed, or told directly or indirectly that your presence and history didn't matter. And that hurt. And the memory of that hurt is still here. So now, when the sanctuary starts feeling full again, or when new people are showing up every week, there's a little voice in some of us that whispers, okay, but are we going to lose ourselves again? Are we going to turn into something we didn't choose? And beloveds, that voice totally makes sense. It's not resistance or negativity. It's the part of you that remembers what it felt like to lose your footing 15 years ago. So I want to be clear when I say that that is not what is happening now. The growth that UUI is experiencing now isn't being driven by one person's charisma, mine or anyone else's. I am leaving in 7 months, and I share that at nearly every opportunity I have. This growth is happening because you are being UUI, because people are finding what you've always been. A place where shared leadership matters, where kids belong, where the circle keeps widening, and the world desperately needs that right now. It desperately needs you. So of course you're growing. But, and as happens sometimes, the lessons from 15 years ago get kind of tangled in, right? It can feel like the takeaway from back then was, growth is dangerous, we're gonna lose ourselves. But if we shift it a little bit, we can see that the lesson might also be that if UUI grows, we must grow in alignment with who we are, with the values this church was founded on. Not personality-driven growth, not one strong leader holds everything together growth, but shared, grounded, intentional growth. And that is exactly why your next minister, your homegrown minister, was so successful, because the growth during that time matched the identity of this congregation. It was shared, it was collaborative, it was UUI being UUI. And here's the hopeful part. You know how to do that now. You have the language for it. You are building the systems for it. You can see the patterns clearly, which means you're not doomed to repeat what happened 15 years ago when you grow this time. You get to choose differently this time. So if you're at this similar threshold again and noticing it, you are not alone. But there's no crisis this time. You might feel it in the everyday ways that tell us that the shape, the form of the community is shifting. You might see it when the sanctuary feels fuller, or when there are more kids than RE, than volunteers, when you don't know everybody at coffee hour, when communication gets tangled, when people have different expectations about how decisions should be made. That isn't failure. That's just what happens when the form changes. In a pastoral-sized church, relationships form the structure, they hold the structure, but in a program-sized church, which you're moving towards, the structure protects the relationships. And when the structure is struggling to catch up, we feel it. Some folks might start to feel left out or overwhelmed. Some folks might feel like we're losing something. And some folks start to feel like the church is becoming alive in new and exciting ways. The seams aren't straining because there's anything wrong. They're straining because the congregation is bigger than the structure designed to hold it. But here's the thing. You get to decide, you get to choose who you're going to be next. You're not passengers in this story. You're the congregation. Every single one of you who has chosen to make this your church home, whether you've been here 45 years or 45 days or anywhere in between. And there are a few different faithful paths that you, the congregation, could take, longtime members and newer folks together. You could choose to keep growing into a program-sized church. That would mean continuing to strengthen shared leadership, clarifying roles, building systems that support communication, and calling a minister who leads by equipping others, a coach to leaders, a leader of leaders. Because the gifts of a program-sized church minister are different than the gifts of a pastoral-sized church minister. Or you could choose to go back to being a pastoral-sized congregation. That would mean being more intentional about your size and calling a minister whose primary gifts are direct presence and pastoral care. Maybe you send a group of you to begin another UU community somewhere else in the city, carrying these same values onto new soil. There's nothing wrong with that model if that's what you choose, and some churches do choose it. The thing to remember is that if you choose to go back to a pastoral-sized church, you will need to find ways to limit your membership, turn people away, and narrow your offerings. And here's what I want to name. Staying smaller would be an active choice. It would mean saying no to some people who want to be a part of this community. It would mean limiting programs. It would mean choosing who gets to be at the table, which friends get cookies, and which don't. And for those of you who just want your old church back, who are reasonably grieving that pastoral closeness, I want you to ask yourself with your whole hearts, does that align with the founding vision of UUI? The one that said, we're leaving All Souls because the circle was too small, because power was too concentrated, because kids were being shut out. Staying a pastoral-sized church isn't wrong, but it is a choice. And ideally, that is one that you would make intentionally, not by accident, not by making the space uncomfortable for new people, not by holding on to the ways we've always done things so tightly that there's not room for new voices. Because here's what I've learned in my years of ministry. Churches don't stop growing because they choose depth over breadth. They stop growing because they choose comfort over courage, or because they're afraid of change. And beloveds, I don't think that's how you are. And I don't think that's how anyone ever envisioned UUI to be. I don't think it's who you've ever been or who you are today. Instead, here is what I think. I think you have always been a program-sized church in your heart. That founding vision, shared leadership, widening circles, no one shut out, including the kids, that's program-sized church DNA. The tension you're feeling isn't because you're becoming something new. It's because your heart has always been bigger than your systems can hold on to. And yes, growing into that might be uncomfortable. It means some of the informal ways that you've done some things won't work anymore. It's why there's been some tension during this interim ministry period as I've tried to help create more structures for things. It means some of you need to step up more, and some of you need to step back more. It means building systems that feel less personal, but actually allow for relationships to grow. And here's the good news. You've done hard things like this before. You left a church to build this one. Whether that means you were part of the founding members here, or if you came out of religious trauma, many of you have left churches to be here to build this one. This congregation has weathered painful periods of growth that didn't align with their values, and you learned from it. You know the difference now between growth that's about one person's ego and growth that's about living your mission fully in a world that desperately needs you. You can do this. I believe that. And I think deep down you believe it too. This is your church, not mine. Did I mention I'll be gone in 7 months? Whether you've been here since the founding or you walked through these doors for the first time today, you get a voice in what happens next. Because that impulse, the one that says, we widen the circle, we share leadership, we make room, that's still here. That is who UUI is. And if you're new here, that DNA is probably what drew you here in the first place. So in this season of change and generosity, I invite you to grow into that and trust that there will be enough cookies for everyone because we have lots of grandmas. I invite you to become more fully yourselves as a congregation, to become more fully that original vision of UUI. You got this. May it be so. May we all together make it so.